It's the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, swinging, and all things about how you can have a secure and sexy relationship. Now here's your hosts, Tara and Andre. Good morning, Andre.
Good morning, Tara.
How are you feeling today?
I'm quite well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. It was a super busy weekend. I think I did something every night, but
did something in the way of like fun, exciting polyamorous dating stuff, or fun in other ways doing stuff? Which way?
Yeah, kind of. Well, interestingly enough, last night I went out and had dinner with my very first boyfriend in university. Well, maybe it wasn't my first one, but he was my first. So that was sort of fun. So we had a really interesting conversation. So we met in I don't want to age myself, a long time ago, decades, like in the previous century, let's just say. So it's quite interesting. And so we had a really great conversation about non-monogamy. So so it was super fun.
So your first, huh?
My first.
From a long list of others. so this is the gardener.
The what?
The gardener?
The gardener. Maybe. How about you? Did you have a good weekend?
I did indeed. I actually went on a second date with somebody, and it turned out to be different than my expectations. Both not bad, but it was different, and then surprised. The outcome was surprising and quite interesting, and we hung out, and it was fun because we went to go see a friend's baseball game, and we were in the bleachers, and we were kind of sipping beers. They brought some beers and stuff, and it felt so much like being in high school. So it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh, awesome. See, there's benefits of, being apart sometimes, right? Like having our own space to do our own things and have fun.
But it's interesting you mentioned that about the benefits of that, because I was thinking about our comrades who might not have that ability, who don't have the opportunity, who might not have the opportunity to go out and date separately, or who might be able to go out and date separately, but then maybe they don't have a place to host or entertain. So, there's a lot of privilege that we really have. And it's interesting to me, considering how other people might have to deal with these things. How do they arrange it? Do they arrange with their cohabitating partner to, vacate the place once in a while? Or is it something, what understandings, what agreements might they have?
Yeah. I mean, these things are all figure outable, right? We can figure it out with conversation and communication and that sort of thing. It's like, what do we want and how can we make it work? So what was interesting about the conversation, we should jump in today's topic, but what was interesting about the conversation, which I told you earlier this morning, which was he was really interested to talk to me about what we've been doing, because little did I know, he's been watching some of our content. And so he was saying, I'm really interested in this. He said, it's funny, when he's in the middle of separating from his wife, or he's separated currently, they're not sure what they're doing. And the suggestion was made to him, like, why don't you open your relationship? And I was like, oh, that's so interesting that someone suggested that, because that's often why people open a relationship, to fix something. And I said, that is the exact not thing to do. Like, if there's anything wrong with your relationship, unless you want to just ignore each other, but if there's anything wrong in your relationship before you open up, like, it will just create a bigger issue, I think. Like, what do you think about that?
No, I think you've got a point there. I often ask people to consider their motive and why they're wanting to go into open relating. Maybe they're doing it from solo, being a solo practitioner, but if they are in a couple and they decide to do this, are they wanting to do it because they think of it as some kind of remedy? And while in time it might bring you closer, if there are any flies in the ointment, it will only seem to magnify that. If you have communication or miscommunication issues at the moment, going into open relationship is probably not going to help address that. There will be so many other things stimulating you that you may not have time or desire to want to address these things. So I think you and I, and correct me if I'm wrong, we suggest that people really look at what's going on with their relationships. Are there things that could be and should be discussed beforehand. Can we learn these communication styles and then come to a place of greater neutrality where it's not prompted by in a desire to avoid something else, that we come to it open, and then we can really take on a new polyamorous relationship, a new open way of relating.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue, as usual, Andre, the king of segues, to share that I'm tired, but I'm super excited because today, we are doing the first module of our training, live training of our course, Newbies. And one of the things we talk about and the exercise that we get people to do as part of this module is specifically figuring out what makes them want to be polyamorous or in an open relationship, consensually non-monogamous, and asking themselves some key questions. So for anyone who's not seen the emails or the posts or anything like that, we are starting the course today. We're going to be doing live trainings as part of this first round. However, everything's recorded in the membership site, so you don't have to join us live if you don't want to. And you can rewatch the trainings and that sort of thing. It's like an all-inclusive course that has, trainings, exercises. We have a private face group where people can ask questions and talk to each other, and tons of activities and things to do. So I'm super excited today to do this training because I love what we put together, and I think that it's a really great start to get into things. So yeah, yay.
Yeah, it is fun. The timing is quite appropriate for the discussion that you had with your friend. I wonder if they are really able to get in touch with their own thoughts and feelings and really be honest with themselves and figure out what is at play, what's going on in their relationship. And, is this part of the repetition? Is it something that was created later on? Whatever it is, we don't know until we start talking about it. And that is, again, the basis of open relating well. It is that you should be able to communicate well. It's not just about sex. It's actually much more about communication. If you can find ways to communicate well, then you can find ways to relate well.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation about where they are and how they came to this part. And even knowing that they were going to get to this part where, this stage in their marriage where they always talked about that there's these stages in your relationship, like before kids, and then having the kids, and then when the kids go out. And they always talked about how are we going to manage this transition between kids going off to school and not being around and us being ourselves again, and had done some really great things, I think, to keep things interesting, but other things changed. And then, so it goes, long story long, but it was just interesting to have that conversation. So knowing it was coming, but then not being able to stop. Well, I guess that's what they're trying to do now, is stop and figure out what they're going to do next. But, someone suggesting that, just open your relationship, that'll solve everything, was just really interesting. They even said that was such a crazy idea, but yeah. So anyway. All right. So today we are just going to talk a little bit about how to succeed as a poly newbie. And so the list of things we put together, coincidentally, not coincidentally, are the same things that are in our course, the same modules. So, I forgot to introduce ourselves. So anyone who's watching who doesn't know us, I'm Tara Lynn Franco. I'm a relationship and awesomeness coach.
You are. And I'm Andre Turgot. I'm a sex positive psychotherapist.
I can tell I'm super excited today. I'm woo, high on life. So what's that?
It's a wonderful place to be.
Yeah. So every week we do a live training here in our private group, Let's Talk Polyamory, and on YouTube and other places in social to talk about what we've learned and how to navigate having an amazing open relationship. So we talked a bit about the course, which starts today. And let's jump into the 7 things. So sure. Let's start with number 1, which is today's module.
Yeah,
do you want to do it, or do you want me to jump in?
Go ahead. You go ahead. Tell me number 1.
So number 1, when you're first, considering opening a relationship, or, you're curious about it, is really starting with some of the basics, sort of get to know what's out there, familiarize yourself with common definitions and terms. And then, like we do in this first exercise, is really ask yourself some tough questions about motivation.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Where are you coming from? We need to know what's prompting you. What's your desire? What are you wanting, or what are you wanting to avoid? So being
Yeah,
honest with ourselves, we gather that data, and then we invite our partners to announce their position as well, because it's not only just about us all the time, right? We are in this with others. We want to find out what might be prompting them, what might be their concerns or reservations.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
So then the next thing is to figure out, okay, with this information, knowing what style of non-monogamy might be right for you, or even monogamy, like looking at the various sort of general options that are out there and finding a starting place and based on the level of emotional or sexual exclusivity that you want.
Yeah, so very often, right, when we're working with couples, they may come from a position of monogamy, and then they may open it up to being kind of a monogamish, and they might start with having more of a sexual orientation and less of an emotional component to it. They may
Mm-hmm.
be emotionally exclusive and start from someplace from there, kind of sort of, it looks a lot like they're still remaining as a couple. They're very much monogamous in many ways, but they start to open it up in their relating sexually primarily in the beginning, or perhaps emotionally, but mostly sexually in the beginning, to open it up and kind of get their feet wet a bit.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think like this drawing that I put up here, this is something that was created, well, sort of created by, and we modified by Jessica Fern. But basically, we had put like this for one of the trainings we did about transitions. So I think the circle I missed was going from monogamy to monogamish and then down to swinging. So,
Mhm.
like doing that sort of the left side where you're still mostly with one person, but you're exploring being with other person, and then flipping over to the other side where it's you are actually having more like emotional connections and relationships with people, so towards polyamory and that sort of thing. So
But this
that's
is but it's by no means exclusive, right? It's not one size
absolutely.
fits all and everybody works this way. It makes me think about high emotional and no sexual component
Mm-hmm.
to it. So say, for example, you meet somebody in the office and you end up having a romance with them. Even if there's no physical demonstration, you may be emotionally connected to this person and want them romantically, and you may have a different way of opening up. Maybe it doesn't start with swinging or unicorns.
Yeah, and in fact, for some people, it's that emotional connection that's the most threatening.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because they're fulfilling needs within you that are, I think sometimes emotional needs are harder to fulfill than sexual needs, right? And if somebody
Yeah, we could see that simply by the physical demonstration of masturbation, right? You can
Mhm.
masturbate yourself sexually, physically, but harder to do emotionally. Although there are things you can do to feed yourself emotionally, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is often something that we get from the other person. And that kind of comes up to the idea of jealousy, right? So my partner now is with somebody sexually, physically, emotionally. Do I imagine that that is because it's got something to do with me, that I'm not enough for them, right? So does it trigger my feelings of insecurity, my jealousy in that way?
Yeah, so that's number 4. We skipped over number 3, but we can go back
Let's
to
go
that.
to two then. Let's go to two.
Is understanding your patterns of jealousy and building security yourself in your relationships. So we had put together this diagram, which is part of our course as well, is sort of like what's sort of the journey that happens when you have that first thought. And jealousy is really a complex thing and something that it's important to understand. And I think part of this too is, and we talk about this, is not feeling like you have to have 100% compersion. So happiness or pleasure for your partner's pleasure. And so jealousy and insecurity is always a huge thing that factors into whether or not, your relationship, you're opening up a relationship or being polyamorous is successful.
And when we speak of jealousy, it's actually a very big umbrella term for other emotions that are in there. It's kind of like saying we're polyamorous or poly. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's limited to that. We often use poly as an umbrella term to include people who are swinging, relationship anarchists, solo, whatever it might be. So when we speak of jealousy, it is almost like a catchphrase now, where it indicates some kind of disruption to the way we feel. But when we start to look at it, we might be able to identify what are the components at play and what are the different emotions attached in what we call jealousy.
Yeah, I'll say from my own personal experience, I'm not 100% jealousy free. Like there's moments where I feel a little jelly or I feel, something, but it's okay. I think the thing is understanding where that's coming from, what it is that's driving that feeling, like you said. And so, yeah, like I asked actually my my boyfriend from the past if he thought this sort of lifestyle would have suited me. Like, and he had an interesting response. He actually thought it did, and I would have thought that he would have thought that I was more of a jealous person. So anyway.
Interesting. But also to that point, like many other things, it does not remain static. We can change over time. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't consider myself to be necessarily jealous, but there were some events that had unfolded where I was caught by surprise and I found myself to be extremely jealous. But then I was able to unpack that. A lot of that had to do with you being a wonderful supportive partner.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was able to recognize that. And now should jealousy ever rear its head, it may be uncomfortable at the moment, but I'm also able to know that it will pass, that I'm able to do things to go beyond the jealousy to the point where actually I can at times feel a little bit of humor in it. Maybe not so much in the moment, but looking back and I say, well, actually it's an indication of my level of investment. It's an indication of my testing my own levels of security and insecurity and finding out that they too are survivable. So
Awesome.
we can kind of transition past that. We can actually psychically mature.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big parts of being successful and we've said it a million times, at least in the hundreds of videos that we've done, is communication. So having great communication. And this slide is just a snippet from our training where we talk about sort of the destructive patterns that you might be engaging in it. So I think the first part in creating great communication is identifying those patterns and then learning how to shift those into more effective communication methods.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if we have the other slide that shows all the positive things we can do, the how we're able to communicate well and effectively. But if not, we will revisit that. Well, there you go. Thank you, Terry. You're amazing.
I happen to have this one still saved. I mean, this is just one of a few of the slides, but yeah, like some of the things you can do. I think the big part of great communication is actually the part where you're not talking. It's the listening part. And so active listening plays hugely into being successful. And it's hard to listen sometimes when you're triggered and emotions are high. So part of great communication is also knowing when you need to take a break and say, let's get back to this when I can approach this conversation with curiosity and an open heart.
Yeah, that's such great points. But the active listening part is so interesting because before really knowing what it was about, I thought that I was a pretty good communicator. I thought that I did a good job of listening. But when we really gain the awareness of what it means to be an active listener, come to find out, well, actually, I could improve quite a bit in my abilities to be an active listener. In fact, we could all improve. And it might seem kind of awkward or foreign in the beginning, but in time, it will become second nature. You'll integrate ways of listening and you'll notice that your relationships increase in quality because you will be more present. You will be a better listener, a more effective communicator, and hopefully your partner will also be participating in something like this, and you'll feel as though you're being better understood. So it's win-win.
Yeah, and I think the part about communication and listening is also not feeling like somebody has to win the conversation. You know what I mean? You don't, not one person doesn't have to be right. It can be just listening to understand different perspectives and appreciating that somebody else has a completely different view of the same situation that you might. I mean, like we had that with a friend of yours. Like she got very angry at me one day and burst out, and she said a lot of things and it was hard to listen, but a lot of things she said were true. And if they weren't true, they were her belief. It was her view of how she saw it. So that was what was important, not that it was true. That she had these thoughts and she had these feelings because of some action that I did. So you have to kind of take some ownership and listen when people have something to share.
And bully for you that you're able to remain open enough to hear that, because what she was saying was perhaps not so easy to receive, but you did try to remain open with your heart to see what it was that they were saying and see what parts seemed valid and what parts you could let go of. So I think it was good that you were both able to have that kind of conversation.
The good thing about learning how to more effectively communicate with our partners, it also helps us communicate better with our families and things like that. Like, I know for myself, one of the big shifts for me in my relationship with my parents has been shifting the way I communicate and the way I listen to them, and understanding that why they might have a certain perspective and where they're coming from, even if I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
And then
it makes me think of nonviolent communication, how we're going to respond to them and how they might be invited to speak to us as well.
Exactly. And I think when we change, people are like, well, I can't change this person. But I think sometimes when we change and we show the example, people do, pick up on it. Not that our partners, we need to wait for our partners to catch up. It's something that I think it's good to work together. But things like parents or that sort of thing, it's a little trickier situation, I think, to navigate. But I've noticed that my mother in particular is more open to having conversations with me, and I have a totally different approach with her. So it's way more effective and makes me much happier. Sometimes we still get into like, but I have to keep reminding myself what's behind what she's really saying. Anyways, communication, big part of this course, and an even bigger part of our more deeper dive course, Open Relationship and Polyamory Mastery, where we teach our attunement communication method and actually have people practice with us on the coaching calls. So
yeah, it's so effective when you really take it from the theoretical and then you start practicing it, and then it's integrated into the way that you communicate. It's essential. It's really great.
Yeah. So the difference between the two things, just I want to say this here because I mentioned the other course, is that program is that this is more of a course that includes training and it's self-directed, whereas the other one is, like I said, a deeper dive and includes direct coaching with us in a group situation. So if you have questions, just message us, whatever. Okay, moving on. Attachment style. So understanding, number 5 is understanding your attachment style and how it may be impacting your relationship. I think I wanted to put this here we go. This was done a little while back, but this was kind of our attachment style. So one of the things we get people to do in the course at the beginning is to do a quiz. And because our attachment style can fluctuate, and depending on how we're feeling, right? And who we're thinking about when we're doing that quiz. So this was ours. And happy to say that mostly secure for both of us. And so it's really interesting to understand your attachment style and what your patterns are, because this will then help you move towards secure attachment in your relationship. Are you okay?
I am. Yes. You're absolutely right. It does change over time, and it does change with who we have in mind and who we are associating with, right? Because we may not feel as secure with some people as we do with others. So there's a big part of that. But generally, I think it gives us a pretty good idea of where we're at. But it is fun to track it over time and see if we are really participating in these exercises, if we are really looking introspectively and starting to unpack things, how it will fluctuate over time and how we might go from being, say, anxious avoidant or disorganized into more secure relationships.
Yeah, and I think the thing that sometimes surprises people when they start in non-monogamy, especially if they're opening up an existing relationship, is how attachment can play into things. So they may feel very well secure in their relationship as a monogamous couple, for example, because there's built-in structural security, right? This is my one and only, they're not going to leave me, like there's a belief that that's a strong structure.
We might even have a marital contract.
A marital contract, you might even have one of those. But then when you open a relationship or like shift into other, like non-monogamy, even swinging or being monogamish, that's hard to say. What happens is it kind of like breaks that attachment, like that foundational secure attachment. And so then the key to success is building other areas of security within your relationship, so that you have that safe haven and the secure base. And so that's the thing that, is important to work on. So
Sure is.
attachment. Okay, number 6 is boundaries, rules, and agreements. And the important part that we cover in the course, and that is good to know, is what's the difference between all these things and what do I need? Because I think sometimes people use the terms interchangeably, but they're very different. And in this module of the course, we have a couple of exercises. We have a really good one on boundaries and establishing your personal boundaries. When we created the activity, I actually did it myself, and I was surprised to see what some of my boundaries are. But it's really interesting to write them down, because then once you know what your boundaries are, it's much easier to communicate them. And then rules and agreements. Yeah, lots to say about that. I'm in favor of agreements, not rules. But those are things to have in place: agreements and boundaries.
Yeah, it's not to say that rules are necessarily a bad thing, but do we kind of want to employ them thinking that they're going to somehow protect us, almost like that marital contract, right? It's a rule that says you shouldn't do this or you can't do that. And we create these beliefs around that, but in fact are broken all the time. What's much better is that we have agreements about things, and we come into it in a much more consensual way. We build these things together and we make these agreements.
Exactly. Okay. And then finally, there's a bunch of other pieces to pull together in order to be successful. So one of the big things in this is creating, having reviews and check-ins for your relationship.
Yeah, it might sound rather foreign or strange, awkward to think of it as having these reviews or check-ins, but we would think that it'd be rather absurd to have a little company and not do quarterly meetings or not be able to look at the balance sheet and assess how we're doing. Well, why should it be any different in our relationship, right? Because feelings will come up and we want to know, how did it land? What are we thinking? How are we feeling? So we take stock of that. We actually sit down and invite each other to let us know how we're doing. And I think it's important that we might even go so far, perhaps in the beginning especially, that we kind of schedule these things. Because if we just think about it in the theoretical, we say, oh yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but we don't do it. Whereas when we say, okay, well, at the end of the month, we're going to talk about how it's going in this quarter. And it sounds kind of transactional, but it's also a good way to err if something is not to your liking so much, or that could stand improvement. It might be hard to just pull it out and say, hey, by the way, I don't like this. Whereas if we feel that we have this invitation to come together to talk about this is our time, then it might make it more of an easier transition and kind of an invitation that's waiting for us already to announce it. You might come to find out, well, there are little things that doesn't seem like a big deal, easy to correct, or maybe it is a good time that we talk about this so we can really address the elephant in the room, the things that are needing our attention.
And I think what's helpful is, especially when people start at the beginning, like, I don't know if you remember our start, but I think what I commonly hear from people is it feels like they're constantly talking about the relationship and dealing with issues day to day. It's like it fills the room and sucks the air out of it. Right. But if you know that, obviously you have to deal with things in the moment if they're urgent or pressing or that sort of thing. But if you know, for example, like at the beginning that you're like, let's do a check-in on Sundays over coffee. Like, how are things going? Is anything come up for you? Blah, blah, blah. It allows you to have a safe space to have those conversations and not have to have them every moment of every day. You know what I'm saying? And then you can have bigger reviews, like you said, like quarterly, and go over a big list of things, like you're.
Yeah, and you may get to the point where you feel as though things are working well and there are no big discussions necessary, that everything is okay. So while it might seem kind of overwhelming or even daunting in the beginning, in time, you might find out, well, we have addressed these issues and now we are able to go about it more freely, more securely.
Yeah, and I think, like you said at the beginning, it's easier to bring things up rather than just saying, oh, hey, Andre, like, oh, I'm feeling this thing. Like, can we talk about it now? Like if you have a check-in, you know that you're going to be talking then, and then you're like, okay, let me think about how I want to broach this and have this conversation. you know.
But there are times when there are fires that need to be put out immediately,
Most
and
definitely.
we're not going to wait for the check-in, right? So again, there's no absolutes, but these are kind of tried and true examples of what might work.
Yeah. So that's what we consider in terms of pulling it all together. Some other things that we have in the course in that particular module is like how to deal with dating and parties, and what next steps you need to take to continue on your journey. So, and these are all the absolute essentials we believe that you need to get started, to progress if you've just jumped in, or if you're curious to get like that solid foundation to get started and make a decision whether or not being non-monogamous is for you. I think that's the thing I want to point out is that while we call it poly newbies, going through this course or even our bigger course doesn't mean that in the end you have to be like, you have to get a certification of being polyamorous. You can decide at the end that it's not for you. The idea is to go through the process of understanding if it might be with you and the types of things you need to set up to see if it can work for you.
You might decide it's not for you at the moment, but you might also decide that it is for you, and then be participating in it, and then eventually say, well, you know what? It's time that we re-examine this model. Maybe we don't want to be doing this anymore, but we want to do a little bit of that. So it'll all come to be only and always by having good communication, being able to communicate what we're feeling and being able to listen well to what our partner or partners are feeling.
Yeah. Exactly.
Easy,
well,
right?
I'll put up the screen one more time for people, although it's been ticking across the bottom the entire time. It's courses.letstalkpolyamory.com/polynewbies course, no space, sorry for the typo. All the information's there. There's frequently asked questions. You have it for 6 months, and you can go back to things, you can jump ahead, you can skip things. The idea is to make it super easy for people to learn what they need to learn and do the things that will help you get set up for success. So I'm super excited. So if anyone has any questions, reach out. But otherwise, let us know. Thumbs up if you liked this training talk. And if you're looking for anything, always just reach out.
Anytime.
Bye, Andre.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
If you want to explore polyamory, open up a relationship, or try your hand at swinging, we can help. Check out our website at taranandre.com for information on our Poly Newbies digital course or our deeper dive open relationship and polyamory mastery program where you get direct coaching from us. There's also other individual and couples coaching options there as well. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with TNA. Don't forget to subscribe and give us some love on your favorite podcasting platform. You can check out the show notes for any of the links to the courses or information we talked about today. Thanks, and have a fantastic and sexy